Hi, everyone, and welcome. Welcome on in. I'm going to share my screen, get the slides going as everyone files into today's webinar, The Art of the Gift, Navigating Art Donations to Cultural Institutions. And we have a great panel today. I'm thrilled. This is not my first webinar with Michael Darling, co-founder and chief growth officer for Museum Exchange. This is the third webinar that we have hosted about donations with Museum Exchange, which is an excellent platform that helps simplify the donation process. And he has generously and so wonderfully graciously brought two folks from his network into this webinar today. We have Rachel Vargas, registrar at the MSU Broad Art Museum, and Kathy and Michael Castile, collectors and donors who have gone through this process, have learnings to share. And we would love to know who is in the room today. So if you don't mind filling out the survey, the poll that will pop up onto your screen momentarily. Anamika will set it live so we can know what type of institution you're from, what role you hold. And then at the end, we always share some tools within Artwork Archive that can help streamline the process that we are speaking to, in today's case, donations. So helpful to understand how many of you are new to Artwork Archive, since we share this webinar wide and fast throughout the internet. One thing to note on the slides, you will be receiving them at the end. It has Michael and Rachel's contact information if you have any questions following. And Anamika, you can end the poll and share the results so folks can see that we have a nice spread. A lot of folks coming from academic institutions. That's great, because Rachel, you represent an academic institution. Mid-sized to large museums, some small museums, public art programs, private collections. Great. We have the collectors here in the room. Excited to see you all. And a lot of you coming from collections management and owning your own collections. Yeah, and a really nice spread of those that are new to Artwork Archive. Welcome. If this is your first webinar, welcome. I hope you'll join us for more. So we'll stop the share. Hopefully that was helpful to you all too, to kind of get a sense of who's participating in this webinar. And I'm going to mute myself and let Michael, co-founder of Museum Exchange, wonderful partner in the collection management space, helping collectors and collecting institutions. I'm going to give him the floor to speak to the best practices that he has seen, given his extensive background working within museums and with his founding of Museum Exchange.
Great. Thank you, Alicia, and great to be here, especially with my partners, Rachel and Michael and Kathy. So just a few things about Museum Exchange. People come to us from all different sectors of the art world when they're seeking to donate art. And it's often because the art in their possession has kind of reached a certain kind of stage where it's ready to move on from their ownership to someplace else. And oftentimes donation is the best way for them to ensure a future for the piece, to be a good steward of the piece. And the works are coming from us from all kinds of different folks. There are art collectors, of course, that come to us. There are corporations that come to us. There are artist estates that come to us, commercial galleries, and even living artists themselves that come to us with art for donation. And I have this slide up because even sometimes museums will refer people to us. This piece that you see here, this great Nancy Rubin sculpture, was first offered to a very prominent name brand museum that you all would know in New York City, that didn't have the kind of space required to display this property properly. And that museum said, "Oh, you really should go talk to Museum Exchange." They told that to the owner slash donor of the piece. And so we brought it onto our platform and put it in front of our growing network of museums. In this case, we've got almost over 350 museums all around the US and Canada, and even one in Brazil actually right now. And those museums all reviewed the work, and the Rollins Museum in Winter Park, Florida, came to us and said, we're building this beautiful new building, which you can see on the right. We would love to have this Nancy Rubens piece in the front of the building as the welcoming gesture. And of course, that really blew away the donor. This was not a museum that was on his mind when he was thinking about this, and it ended up being, the perfect solution both for the donor and for the institution. So these kinds of happy matches is really what drives us and what is rewarding in this whole process. We can go to the next slide. I also had mentioned artist estates, and I know that there are many estates that work with Elysian and Artwork Archive. One of the early estates that came to us was the estate of Ethel Fisher, who was a great painter who was active from the 50s all the way through, actually from the 40s all the way through until the early 2000s when she passed away. Had a great career, always pushing herself, always evolving. And we thought the work was fantastic, even though she didn't really have much name recognition. There was really very little market for her work that was established out there. But we thought, we can take this work, put it in front of our museum directors and curators, and see what they think. And we've had an incredible response to Ethel's work over the years. This is a shot at the Museum of Contemporary Art in San Diego, where Ethel, heretofore under-recognized artist, is hanging right next to Helen Frankenthaler. So those kinds of stories are really exciting for us to see. And for us, we don't have kind of admissions goals or anything, or our box office to think about. So we can take an artist like this, put it in front of our museums at little risk, and see what happens, and really kind of test the waters. And so we've seen this kind of so-called rediscovery happen over and over again with artist estates. So that's really a growing area, especially considering the baby boomer generation of artists that are all, starting to get up there in age and are starting to think about their legacies. This is an ongoing conversation and really a growing field. So just something to mention. We could turn to the next one. On the other side, of course, I was talking there about donors and the folks that have the art they want to donate. We're also simultaneously cultivating relationships with museums all around the country. One of the best ways of doing that is really having in-depth conversations with those curators, those directors, learning what they're looking for their collections, which directions they're trying to build in. And then that gives us information that we can build on when things come our way. And because of Rachel's partnership and her presence on the panel today, I wanted to bring just a couple examples of some things that have come to the Michigan State University's Broad Museum. We've had a fantastic relationship working with Rachel's curator and director colleagues over there. They've had a very, very adventurous eyes, really pushing their collection in interesting directions, have some interesting kind of demographics in their visitorship that they've also addressed, I would say, through the works that have come in to their collection. And so these pieces here, one by Chitra Ganesh on the left, who's a great artist that works a lot with South Asian imagery and information, as well as comics. And then on the right, a really exciting emerging artist from the Detroit area, Paul Verdell, that the Broad Museum was very smart to grab. I just had the pleasure of seeing several new pieces of his at a new art fair in the Berkshires over the weekend. And so he's definitely someone to keep an eye on. We could go to the next slide.
And Michael, for those do you mind, for those that are new, that don't know much about Museum Exchange, you've mentioned working with donors and you've mentioned working with the institutions, but what does Museum Exchange do with these two different groups?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Alicia. So what we do is we kind of really bring them all together through a digital catalog that we produce every 3 months. It's a quarterly catalog. Once the 3 months is over, that catalog disappears and a brand new one appears, and it's filled with art that's all available for donation. Only museum people can sign on and look at it, so it's very discreet in that way. The donors are not even listed, but where they're located or the location of the work is located is noted so that people can figure out how much it might cost to transport that work from wherever it is now to the museum that's interested. And the museums register their interest right on the platform, and then that information goes to the donors, who then can make informed decisions about who out there wants their work.
That's great.
And yeah, and that's the same with our museum audience, as well as our separate network of hospitals and universities and other nonprofits that also want art in their public spaces. It's a similar kind of digital catalog. Um, and the results of that are really kind of borne out in a slide like this. These are all pieces that the Castiles had brought to us, and I should just say that Michael and Kathy and I go back 20 years or so. We first met when they were in Seattle and prominent collectors on the scene there when I was working at the Seattle Art Museum. And so it was really great to work with them to find museums all around the country that would benefit from their art as they were starting to kind of plan their next chapters. And you can see here pieces have gone to the Ulrich Museum in Kansas, the Gund Gallery at Kenyon College in Ohio, the Crocker Museum in Sacramento, and the Grand Rapids Art Museum in Michigan. Just as a small sampling of the pieces, I think we helped with about 30 pieces or so of all different media, scale, dimensions, everything in the Castile collection, and the museum response was really fantastic. So this was, and I think we have a couple other slides too that show these works actively in the galleries of some of these museums. If we wanted to go to the next slide, Elysian. So yeah, here is a beautiful Louise Nevelson piece that ended up at the Art Students League of New York. They immediately put it on view. And that's something that we definitely see our donors responding to when the museums come to them with a proposal that says, we would like to put this on view immediately. The thing that collectors hate the most is that things just go into storage and don't get used. So that's one of the most persuasive arguments that someone can put forward in a proposal on the museum side. And we can go to the next slide. I want to be attentive to my time here. This is another example, this great artist from the Pacific Northwest, Ellen Lesperance, and this piece of hers from the Castiles collection went to the Frye Art Museum, and as you can see on the left there, already put into an exhibition right there. It just made itself right at home in the galleries. We have, I think there's one more. Oh yes, one more. Although this isn't from the Castiles, but we've kind of noted that there's a few different motivations that donors have. One of them is downsizing, and this really aligns with the big generational shift we have from the baby boomer generation. They're talking about a gigantic wealth transfer that's coming from that generation too. That's sometimes mentioned up into $100 trillion of wealth that's being transferred from that generation. And so that's one of the reasons that people come to us when they're, moving from big homes that had big art collections to smaller houses and apartments, and what to do with all that art. So back on the far wall, there's a rather large wall hung piece by Eva Kotakova that was perfect for the Ulrich Museum in Wichita. And their curators, who always are ahead of the curve, spotted that piece and brought it into the collection. We've got a couple more slides just showing some of these different case studies. Here on the right is a big photo, 4-piece photo work by Yan Huang, Chinese artist. And this, again, was just too big and too space intensive for the owners of this piece to continue to live with, and made a perfect home at the Boca Raton Museum. We also, find people that are still actively collecting, and they might have started in one place with their collecting activity, and gradually their tastes got more and more, or evolved, I should say, and have moved beyond things that they've started with into other things. And so on the far right here, you have a Robert Mapplethorpe piece, a beautiful, very classic piece that just didn't fit with these folks' collecting habits anymore. They went in an even more radical direction. But this was a piece that was extremely popular amongst our museums and ended up at the Museum of Contemporary Photography in Chicago. And I think we've got one more, which is something that maybe some of the folks on the call also have experienced, which is it's easy to buy art, but it's hard to sell art. And oftentimes folks will take art that they have bought from a gallery, bring it back to the gallery on consignment to see if those galleries can sell it. And oftentimes it's not so easy to do. Also, of course, sending things to auction is another option, which is also not as easy as the big headline grabbing art sales might suggest. And so donating art becomes a really great solution. And so I'd say that was the situation with this great Tony Cragg piece here that just made more sense to the donor to donate it to a museum, and in this case, the Memorial Art Gallery in Rochester, New York, where, as you can see, it's being enjoyed by the whole community rather than sitting in a crate in storage somewhere. So those are some of the positive stories that have come out of this, and hopefully some of the background and how this whole mechanism works. So we've got a few more here, but
I was just yeah, there's two more. If you want to hit them quickly, I was going to say too that the case study that you just gave was also what prompted our conversation about this webinar, was seeing that there's more and more donations happening because of the climate of the art market. And so interesting for institutions to know that perhaps there might be some more folks coming down, through your doors, or for collectors to consider this as an option.
Yeah, yeah. And I guess this one with stewardship again, sending a piece off to auction, and especially if it doesn't perform well at auction, can be quite damaging to an artist's market. And so donating it to a museum that will have it in perpetuity, put it on view, is just a really great story as people are thinking about the artists that they've collected and in many cases come to know. And this was a great situation where this large John Kessler piece from the 1980s, it was even in a Whitney Biennial, ended up at the Colby College Museum in Maine, and it's become a favorite of students and faculty there. And it was a great story of this piece coming out of dormancy, back on the wall, back into life. So
I love that.
yeah.
Activated piece. And then this is the last one.
Oh yeah, and so this one here too, another success story at the MCA San Diego. This in the foreground is a great sculpture by Richard Hunt. That museum did not have any sculpture by this great Black sculptor from Chicago. They had some works on paper, I believe. And so when they inaugurated their new galleries, this had pride of place in a gallery where you can see Barnett Newman and Leon Polk Smith and Sam Gilliam, or not Sam Gilliam, I'm forgetting the artist, Jack Whitten there on the left-hand side, and absolute pride of place. And this was from a large collection that was, again, sort of downsizing, trying to wrap up the family legacy, and found the perfect solution for this particular piece.
Thanks, Michael. And Richard Hunt's impressive legacy, extensive body of work has just been digitized and shared to show the breadth of his work. He's an incredible artist if folks aren't familiar with him. And Michael, I thank you for starting us off on this great conversation, for bringing Rachel and Michael and Kathy today here. And folks, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A for Michael. He's a wealth of knowledge. And with that, I'll hand it over to Rachel to give her registrar's perspective.
Hello, everybody. I wanted to give you a bit of background about where I work. I work at Michigan State University. We're in the middle of the state of Michigan. And this is an adorable picture of our gallery when it first opened, which was very late compared to how many other museums have been collecting for so long. We didn't open until 1965 as a gallery for the art department. And pretty much we had 4 rooms in the art center. And it was that way when I came and interviewed for a job about 20 years ago. I was working at a big academic museum in the Boston area. And I thought, how adorable would it be to work at a small museum with only 4 galleries? And my family was all still in Michigan. Next slide. And so I feel like I was only there for about 5 minutes before Eli Broad, he and his wife Edith were big collectors in the Los Angeles area, and he went to Michigan State. He came to visit and he proposed funding the building of a new museum. So there we were again, lots of building, a big building where they tasked us to focus on international contemporary art. When we opened in 2012, we opened with staff who ran the museum as a Kunsthalle. meaning that all of our galleries turned over every couple of months. We had none of the permanent collection on permanent display, no permanent collection galleries. We integrated the collection into our exhibitions, but mostly we were doing loan shows, which upset a lot of people who lived and who were used to visiting. In Michigan, we are the only art museum for 60 miles, and especially for the cutbacks that the K through 12 schools have been going through in the last 20 years with the arts, we really felt like we were not able to serve our constituents by just showing international contemporary art, which sometimes, especially in our part of the country, is a high bar for explaining what these four sticks on the ground mean and what the significance is. So next slide. We formulated about 3 years ago, we knocked down a whole bunch of galleries, a whole bunch of offices. We had a director who said, we're not going to have a conference room because it's better to have meetings where everybody's standing up, because then all your meetings are only 10 minutes. So we took a whole bunch of space on our lower level and came up with this Center for Object Research and Engagement, which we call the CORE, which features our permanent collection. Right now, we're trying to hold the line because every once in a while a curator wants to put a couple of loans up there. But we have really tried to hold the line that this is for showing the collection, and we change it every 6 months. So of course, every 6 months you have to pull out your works on paper, you have to pull out color photographs, and then we are changing things as they are asked for and requested by our education team, curatorial. And this is an area where we can highlight gifts that donors have given to us. So I know they said, just to talk about how gifts come into the university. They come into the university by people, almost always by email. People approach our curators, they approach our director, I get direct emails, and they also come into us through advancement. Which is our, development office. MSU is huge. We have about 50,000 students coming through a year. They have global fingertips all over the place for working with our alumni. So we get a lot of offers from our alumni on top of a lot of offers from, people who are local in Michigan. We love gifts, to be offered gifts, because often most of our purchases come out of our exhibition programs. So if we are highlighting, an artist from China, from Pakistan, from Spain, a lot of times we work with younger artists, and our curators want to acquire something from that artist that was either made for our exhibition or is a seminal work to be able to add. So gifts very much help fill in the gaps that we have in our collection. As Michael noted, our curators have really loved looking around for objects that are not just contemporary works that you would find in a high-end gallery or all of the millions of fairs that they go to. And again, most of our curators, their expertise is in contemporary art. So it is fantastic that we have donors who still give us, mid-century photographs, or I just love it when somebody offers us a Piranesi print, a print from the 17th century. So because those are things that our curators aren't actively seeking out to purchase or even to have people give us gifts, because that's not their field. They don't know about prints. They don't know about the, Italian 17th century. Those are really integral to especially our teaching mission at the museum. So again, some things that we love, the donors who tell us, this is what I have. Here is a digital image of it so we can see the condition. And we always have to suss out if they have any restrictions. We have to do everything within the tenets of the university, and they do not. They very, very rarely let us accept a gift with restrictions. We have people who try to give us gifts and say, we'll give it to you, but you have to put it on display. So, and then we say, thank you, no, thank you, because we don't have really any permanent collection galleries, so we can't agree to that. And we would never agree to that. Sometimes people ask that. I'm like, you have a work on paper. We put this on display forever. It's going to get ruined. You have to explain about light levels to people. And And so sometimes I will say one of the hurdles is if there are condition issues. We had an alumna offer us some very nice Chinese figures from the Tang Dynasty. She had very good provenance information because you have to be careful with those things. There are a million fakes out there. And we are not big enough that we have a conservation lab where you can do analytical testing. So after we went through all the steps to see that we were okay with the dealer she bought it from, the provenance paperwork, the x-ray and analytical testing, the last issue was that they had kind of like flanges that went out from the sides, and several of them were broken. She said, I will give you money to pay for the conservation of these works. So most of the time we won't accept a work that has any conservation needs because we don't have a big endowment for conservation and we just don't have the time or the space to have a collection like that. Some museums who have a huge conservation staff can accept it and put it in line to get work done in the lab. That's not us. So in that case, that was clearing all of the barriers for us acquiring the work. Next slide, please. Our curators, before a gift is accepted, have to defend the work. They have to talk about the artist. They have to talk about what the work is, why it's important. They have to say how it fits in with our collection. Because sometimes there's a work where you can say, this is so unique, we should have this kind of object in our collection. But other times we will say, we have nothing like this in the collection. When would we, in what context will we ever be able to display it? And so now our director always says, yeah, you can't say because it's a woman artist or because it's an artist from Guatemala. He says it has to have a bigger reason than that. And then the third barrier we have to cross is our curators have to say, who else at MSU is going to want to use this office? And so our biggest thing that we do is outreach to the professors and to the students to come in and see our collection. My favorite thing is to ask a class of 30 students what they're majoring in, because believe me, nobody's majoring at MSU in history of art. We have like 5 people majoring in history of art. But I do think, you get the packaging students, they want to be a lawyer, they want to be a doctor, they want to be a chemist, a scientist. This is what you want to instill in them as a university is a love for the museum and a love for art. Because then we want them to go out and get a big job as a scientist, make a ton of money, and then collect art and give it all to us. So, but it really does, you have to make a personal connection. And sometimes it's just one-on-one in a group of students coming in this case, to look at a small Etruscan bronze. Next slide. I just have a few more because I'll run out of time. And so here we did just get this for Adele painting through the Museum Exchange Program. And now our director has put myself and our collections manager kind of in charge of what we want to display in this core space, because the first 2 rounds we had our curators do it, yet they just wanted to hang a whole bunch of contemporary art that they had just bought that is no different from what people see on the other 2 floors of our museum. And what we feel the core is for is that people will come in and look at a contemporary artist that they don't quite get or understand, but if they can come down to the core, there's artwork that they recognize as artwork. There's our Greek vases. There are, figural paintings. There are Islamic works, Asian works, African works. The whole gamut we try to have represented in the core so that there's a little bit of something for everybody. And this is why gifts are integral to this, because again, a lot of these non-contemporary things are not things that we're actively going out to seek. So I'm sure people might have questions on the end, but what we like to say is that our gifts not only have a great impact for in our exhibitions, but for how we reach not only the Mid-Michigan community, but the 50,000 students that come to the university every year, and we try to lure them in with parties where there's free pizza and free drinks so that they understand where the museum is, that we're free, and that they can come to visit anytime. Thank you. I think that was my last slide. Yes.
It was. I love that. I'm wondering how many fellow academic institutions also learn with pizza and parties. One of the things that you mentioned reminded me a wonderful executive director of a small museum in Los Angeles who couldn't sit on the panel today. When we were chatting about this topic, she made note that, you know, they are a small museum with very limited space. And so she has to say no to a lot of donation requests. She can only accept about 2 or 3 a year because of their limited space. They don't have much storage and then only so much space on the wall. And so she just wanted to share that to collectors and donors. And then how platforms like Museum Exchange are so wonderful because the first museum that you may have in mind may say no, but there may be someone else, you know, down the street or across the country that you didn't know of that would have take considerable value from the object. And I'm so glad that you have that space now, Rachel. It's beautiful. I want to go visit and see it. And students are so lucky, and the community is so lucky to have it.
And could I just add one last thing for people who are collectors out there trying to donate? If you're not able to work through a system like the Museum Exchange, you have to not give up and you have to not take it personally when museums either, I mean, I'm sure some museums just never even respond to people who offer gifts or when they say no, because it is. Even though we're lucky that we built a new museum and we got to keep most of our old museum to use for storage space, space is a huge issue for accepting and a lot of times that's what people, I'm like, of course they're trying to give it to us because it's, you know, it's 10 foot by 12 foot painting and they're tired of it in their living room. So of course I'm going to put it in a crate and put it in front of your desk. But I don't really always say that to our curators. So I always feel like it. But so you just have to keep emailing people and not, like I say, don't take it personally and don't give up because sooner or later, hopefully you find the perfect fit.
Yeah, that's really great to share. Yeah, speaking of downsizing, you know, collectors are downsizing, and then museums have limited space as well. Yeah, thank you, Rachel. And last but not least, we have Michael and Kathy to speak to their experience donating dozens of works across the country and sharing their perspective about why they donated, what helped in the process. So hopefully fellow collectors see someone, hear someone that speaks their language and can give some insights and institutions to hear a little bit about collectors. So I guess my first question to you, Michael and Kathy, is what are your goals behind giving when you donate? What are your personal motivations? Why do you donate art?
Well, we are the quintessential example of the demographics that have been discussed, first wave of the baby boomers. And the primary motivation was downsizing. We love collecting art, and we didn't come from an art background personally or in our families. So it was sort of midlife when we discovered the joys and wonders of viewing art and visiting museums and fairs. And we love virtually all of our pieces, and we tried to live with as many as we could, but we were at the point we needed to downsize. And we were first in Seattle, and so that was the main motivation, really. First off, we gave our two children the run of our database and let them select pieces they wanted. And they each took a few, but it didn't put much of a dent in. You know, there's a lot remaining. And then when we moved to Northern California, we had a home big enough to display a lot of art, but we still had a lot in storage. So that sort of motivated us to try and figure out what we were going to do. But when we were in Seattle, we worked with an art consultant, and we approached museums in the area that we had worked with and knew about. And I must say, interesting examples that in the slides Michael showed of our work, there were two pieces that were initially turned down by institutions in the area. I felt, well, one was actually we tried was presented at auction and didn't sell, which amazed me, and the other one was a large digital photograph that what the museum wasn't interested in acquiring. So, but then Museum Exchange found homes for those. So that was our primary motivation. And I think also we both were involved. I was a trustee at the University of Washington Contemporary Art Museum for a number of years. And we both have a soft spot for the smaller museums and college and university museums. And until we started working with Museum Exchange, I didn't realize, I knew about a few of them, but I didn't realize how many there are across the country. So, I mean, that was interesting. So, and also smaller museums, because a lot of museums don't, smaller ones don't have an acquisition fund. They rely on donations from people like us, or maybe somebody on the board will buy a piece that has been in a special exhibit and donate it to the museum. So they really appreciate being able to acquire these pieces. And I think a lot of the smaller museums then really appreciate the work itself. And so that was pretty much our two goals as it is.
Yeah. Oh, thanks for sharing that. And then what has worked in the past and what hasn't worked when it comes to the donation process? Like what has made it smoother for you when working with institutions, and perhaps what hurdles have you had to jump over?
Well, I kind of alluded to that with, the examples of pieces that we worked with an art consultant in Seattle, and he helped us figure out which museums in the area to approach.
But that was just limited to museums in the area.
Yeah, it didn't have the scope of Museum Exchange. And the Henry, the museum we were connected to, had just received a huge number of donations from a couple other fellow boomer collectors, and they really didn't have room. They didn't look like Rachel was saying, there's the storage considerations and all that. So, there wasn't really a viable option for us. So that's how Museum Exchange really helped us broaden the reach of, across the country. Would have taken, I don't know how much research to come up with all these museums and try and approach them. And then not to mention the health institutions, which is another great avenue for donating.
Yeah.
And we've been happy to see some of our work go to clinics and
Yeah.
hospitals.
Yeah.
And it's going to get well viewed there, I'm sure.
Yeah, I think those pieces, and I know it's a common misconception, or I had too, because I was new to collecting in the museum world. I just assumed you gave something to a museum and they're just going to hang it on the wall right away. And that is not the case. They rotate, and it just doesn't work that way usually. I mean, maybe a big sculpture that can go out in front of the building, which is fabulous. But just lots of other things, they'll come out when there's a related exhibit or for studies, which is another good reason to donate to museums, because they have a lot of ways to put them to use with the students and faculty.
Absolutely.
So now I've lost track of what.
Oh, no, that was great. Now, actually, I was just going to jump in and say, Rachel mentioned, not being able to exhibit a work on paper for perpetuity.
And
That is
crafts.
Yeah, and if that's important to the collector, then hospitals are a great place to donate to, because they, for better or for worse, they will hang it on the wall. Perhaps it won't face a north-facing window, and it'll be hopefully in a darker corridor, or rather one that doesn't have a lot of light. But that hospitals are a great place to donate to, as you said, for having the works be viewed and appreciated for long amounts of time.
And then the museums know how to take care of their pieces, and they don't take on pieces they can't restore or take care of. So your piece is going to be in good hands going forward.
Yeah, it's all about the different motivations, and then understanding why an institution may say yes or no. Do you mind, Kathy? You mentioned a database. That's great, and then you could show it to your children. And Michael and I were joking before we started the webinar. You get a gold star for having an online database, or a database to refer to. What type of information did you keep track of, or then did the art advisor or you share out to the institutions? Like, what was the type of information being shared?
I'll turn this over to our database expert here to answer.
Right. Well, we ended up over time with quite a few pieces in our collection. So the database only had entries for salient information. I didn't put a whole lot in, but we did have acquisition date, the date of the artwork itself, the artist,
Gallery.
the where we acquired it from. We got some things from art fairs, but you get it from a gallery and an art fair. So all that information was together. And of course, the acquisition price was in there. I was just looking at it the other day. Only a few of them are in euros and UK pounds, but most of them are in dollars. So it was pretty easy. And the database was great because then I had images in the database, only 1 or 2 images per work usually, because it wasn't my job. I mean, I was just doing this that was part of my hobby, as it were, and contributing to our art collection results. So that made it fairly easy then. Once Michael had reintroduced himself to us, and we said, sounds like a good approach. Let's try museum exchange because we have an ever-growing number of things in storage as we keep downsizing.
Yeah.
And I was able to pull out of the database images, provenance information, the original price, of course, artist and title and date of the work. And so that made it pretty easy for us to put together a package to send off to Museum Exchange where the information was all together with images and what we remembered about them.
Yeah.
Which, as I said, I didn't put everything in from like conversations and stuff that we'd had. I just didn't have the energy or time to go into all that, nor the memory, actually. So that was our database. I've since switched out. We were in an online database, which had lots of nice bells and whistles, but it was a big monthly charge. So I've downsized to a database that's one of the apps on my computer, and it doesn't have all the bells and whistles. So it'd be difficult for me to, for example, export a spreadsheet with images and everything else from it, but I work around that as that need be. Now that there's less need, I'm happy with that.
Well, with Artwork Archive, you can easily export your all of your artwork and data into a spreadsheet, and I'll show some examples in a few moments and a few slides for the collectors that are on the call and the institutions. But do either of you have a piece of advice for collectors that are considering a gift?
I think museum exchange is a great way to go. Maybe regardless, I was trying to think of examples where maybe you can just do it on your own, but I think they're just so helpful, and especially if you have multiple pieces and maybe they're more regional artists. I mean, like our collection primarily wasn't big name in quotes artists. It was we like collecting locally in Seattle with local galleries. But if we were in an art fair and we saw something, we'd buy it. But it was a lot of Pacific Northwest artists to start out. And anyway, Museum Exchange was able to find institutions across the country that were interested in these works. So it's just broadens your reach.
They have a whole catalog that's then available to museums and et cetera, all over the place, which was really neat.
Yeah, and the donors are anonymous. So, the image of your work is presented, but no names at that point. So it's just a very easy, well, not easy. I mean, there's still a lot of things to do, but
and one of the valuable aspects, I think, of Museum Exchange's system is when interest is expressed by an institution, the online system we have access to lets us look at the proposals from the various institutions. And that's a really good, felt good for us to be able to say, well, that one's just boilerplate. Luckily, we have some other proposals for that piece, and that one's obviously not boilerplate. They talk about how this work would fit in their, say, their teaching actions and so on. I mean, one piece we had in particular, I was really impressed that we got hooked up with a museum that likes sports related art, because we had at an auction in the Seattle area purchased an artwork that was basically a basketball hoop with a net made out of jewels.
Right, rhinestones.
And one of Museum Exchange's participating institutions was a museum that was interested in sports related art. And so, we had kind of given up on, we'd never get rid of that. And we don't have a place to put it anymore. But
It worked.
it turned up.
That's great.
So it has a good home now.
Oh, I love those stories, and I love the story of hearing the specificity of how the object will be used, especially within teaching collections. Something that might have gotten a no from another institution may help another academic institution round out their.
Yeah. There's such a broad range of museums and the sizes and interests we found out through this process. So.
Oh, well, thank you.
We had a heck of a time finding them on our own.
Yeah, we never could have done it.
Well, and hopefully there's some connections here being made on the webinar with institutions introducing themselves. With the interest of time, we have a lot of great questions that I want to make sure we get into. And if we don't get to all of them, I do have record of them. So I see a lot of questions from Museum Exchange. I can connect you to Michael to get your answers. Thank you, Michael and Kathy. So speaking of the database really quickly, and Rachel mentioned this quite clearly, how important it is when the collectors have images. I saw there was a question about appraisals, any appraisal documentation, provenance, proving the authenticity of the work. Collectors use Artwork Archive, our online art collection management system, to be able to simply upload images, bills of sale, documentation that they have about the purchase of the piece, any information they have about the artist, as Michael mentioned. Rachel mentioned that the director's, not just interested in an artist who may be Guatemalan or female, but what other information do you have about the artist that tells their story and may make them appealing to the institution and help them tell their stories and fit their larger collecting mission. And so this is just a screenshot from Artwork Archive as a reminder of all the information that our panelists have shared that is helpful to track when preparing for a donation, sending that information out. You can easily send this from Artwork Archive, the value, the artist name, the creation date. I don't have, as part of this screenshot, the provenance notes, but you have that publication history, exhibition history. And then once you have donated a piece for estate planning and records, you can note that. And so, the account lives on after you. So, if your children are managing your estate afterwards, then they'll know where all the pieces are that have donated, when the contact information with that curator or registrar. And then to flip it, for the collecting institutions, the fact that you can track the donations that have come into your collection, from whom. So here on by the arrow, we have the donor Jack. If I click into his record, I can see all of the pieces that he has donated. Perhaps he has also included some funds that go towards the conservation of the work, as Rachel mentioned. And then what we have heard is our collecting collecting institutions can include attribution lines. They can quickly bring these pieces online. So, we've mentioned limited storage a lot, and we can talk about some other factors for why an institution may not take a piece. I saw that in the questions. But if it is not immediately being exhibited, it can still be online and accessible for researchers, students, community members, and making the impact of this work instantly felt and spread throughout the communities. And so our collecting institutions love that they can put this in their artwork archive account and instantly make it public, embed it onto their website. And so I have some questions. For Nicole, who asked about appraisals, we do have an appraisal webinar that may also go into more detail for what you need. But do museums require independent appraisals before accepting gifts of art? How do you go about that process? And Rachel, I'll ask that one of you.
Well, I can say that no museum can require, they should not require an appraisal, because technically you as a museum, as a nonprofit, are supposed to have nothing to do with the value. There's supposed to be a wall there. That said, I usually ask donors if they can give me a value, a ballpark value, so I can insure the piece if we're doing the shipping. But then if people want to take a tax deduction and the value is over $5,000, for us as a university, people have to have a legal appraisal done, which means a certain type of appraisal. It can't just be, anybody who does it. And then that needs to be sent to us. We need a copy of the appraisal if you want us to co-sign the tax forms. And that is a university rule, even though people sometimes argue with me and say, you are only signing that you received the object. We're not signing off on the value, but that is a due diligence thing that I think most university academic places require for that. But that said, we have a lot of gifts that are given to us by artists. They still can't take a tax deduction, so it can be worth $1 million. And people can't take a tax deduction. So we do just try to capture some kind of value from the donor, but you can't require that.
Gotcha, thanks. Let's see. As a donor, so Kathy and Michael, do you give the museum the original or a copy of the purchase receipt and any documentation for their archives as well as the artwork? So is there other documentation that you send?
I don't recall. We haven't in general. Sorry about that. I do have it in paper files, but I'd have to go digging for them.
So I guess the answer was no.
And the answer is pretty much no.
No problem. We're all learning. So if you do,
Well, I have some certificate of authenticity
yeah,
on some of the works, like the Kiki Smith came with a certificate signed by Kiki. I sent that in because
yeah,
I found that. I said, oh, that's important. That should go with it. But the original receipt from XYZ Gallery in Podunk, Washington, no.
Well, and that's when you talk about time of remembering things. When we do educational webinars for collectors, always reminding them to attach the documents or upload, adding the details, because it's amazing how within a year or even a week, details can be forgotten. So thanks, Michael. Nisa has a question. I'd love for panelists to address how to overcome challenges beyond just institutional lack of storage. We have been approached about a number of attractive donations for a university public art collection, but don't have ready funds to handle installation costs and future maintenance costs. Tips on navigating this conversation with potential donors and determining endowment or associated cash gift amounts would be very helpful. I agree. Rachel or Michael, do you have any advice on this?
I do, but I'll let Rachel chime in first.
Oh, well, I guess what I would just say is that if it was we don't usually ask people to give us money. I know there's been some discussion of you should tell everybody who gives you a gift to also give you $500 in cash to care for it. And we don't really do that. I do think if we were going to accept something as an outdoor sculpture that we knew needed ongoing maintenance, that would probably be where we would bring our development team in to see if they wanted to have that conversation. If it was a deal breaker, what they might say is that we can only accept this piece if it comes with, $10,000 for the installation and for the upkeep of the piece. But, again, we're a little bit different because we're a university art museum. So we've had people give us some big outdoor things where we have departments at the university who can help us install a large Roxy pane or a large Ryman sculpture. And I know a lot of other places do not have all of these departments to call upon. It can never hurt to ask for something, but then I think what you would have to do is to decide if it's a requirement or a deal breaker.
Yeah, I would say it's really a growing area within the whole donation landscape is giving cash to go along with the donation, because this isn't the art. The art maybe is free at the beginning, but it's not free kind of going forward. There's so many costs for storage, for conservation, or like Rachel said, for oftentimes installation. So depending on the size of the gift or the complexity of the artwork, oftentimes it just really sweetens the deal, and expresses kind of the awareness of the complexity of the gift for a donor to have some art, some cash available for those kinds of things. And you especially see it if someone's like Kathy and Michael were saying, some like 200 pieces coming all at the same time. Oftentimes, that's like a whole new registrar that's required just to process those gifts. So oftentimes that's where money could come into it. And one example and a mentor to us at Museum Exchange is Jarl Mohn, the great collector in Los Angeles, who's started a collaborative collection for 3 museums in Los Angeles. And not only has he given art that's to be shared amongst those 3 museums, but he's also paying for shipping, or rather storage and conservation for those pieces. So he's a real leader in that. And I think as we go forward, we'll be seeing more and more of that kind of recognition of the cost of maintaining artworks over time, and how museums can use some help with that.
Yeah. And hopefully, Nicole, I see you had a question. Nicole had a question about trying to obtain funds for maintenance and future conservation, not just for the thing that needs to be actively conserved. So appreciate you sharing that. And hopefully there are some donors that are passionate about conservation, and so that the institutions aren't just reliant on grants or operating funds for that. Let's see. If the timing of a donation is important, and I know we're at past time, but I'll close out with a few more questions we can go over for 5 minutes if that's okay with everyone. If the timing of a donation is important, say close to the end of a tax year versus the next tax year, can you make a promise gift through the proposal? I believe this is for you, Michael.
Well, we definitely have had some promised gifts, and I suppose that could be one way to get something done more quickly if the artwork can't be transported to the museum before December 31st and all that sort of thing. And then presumably can be completed later in the next year once all of that could take place. But that's definitely something that we're always considering once we start getting in those last couple months of the year, is how possible this would be for the museum, especially to receive the work and to do all the proper paperwork. We're always thinking about that when we're talking to donors and bringing on things in that fourth quarter of the year. So it's a bit of a moving target, but if it starts getting into December, it's dicey to really complete something. It would have to be a museum that's very close to where the donor is to really make that happen. And so we did some heroics last year to pull off a couple of those, but it's not preferable for the museums in particular, or even for us trying to help the process along.
Thanks. A question for Rachel to end. Well, yeah, to end with, and I have 2 more questions. Do you have a written collection development policy?
We ours is in process right now. We call it a roadmap.
Yeah.
And like for ages, we had very few photographs in the collection. And so that was a collecting area. But then when I came to work at the museum, I pointed out that we shouldn't be acquiring color photographs en masse because we do not have the facilities to care for them as you should for color photographs. And then our whole collecting roadmap, for maybe the last 10 years, we've always been good, since the 70s, adding women artists. But it was more what everybody was doing, trying to add more different artists, speaking in different voices. And of course, now we are just not quite sure. They've told us at the university we can't use these terms anymore. We can't use affirmative action. We can't use DEI. So we're waiting for a new director to come on board, and they can solve that problem.
Appreciate that. Well, it seems like a lot of you folks stayed on to the bitter end, offering great questions. I see Michael was answering a lot of the questions in the Q&A, so thank you, Michael, for jumping on those. Again, it's great to have your expertise. And Rachel and Michael and Kathy and second Michael, there are two Michaels. Thank you for joining the conversation. I'll be sending out the recording in the next day or two as it is ready. And given the many great questions, we can have like a little recap in the email as well of resources that may be helpful for folks. And there is a survey at the end of when you close out of this webinar to give us feedback of what worked and what didn't in this webinar, and if you have any topics you'd like us to cover in the future. We do webinars for collectors, collecting institutions, artists. My colleague Anamika does a lot of presentations for artists, and it's always a joy to share out information that can help you all with your collection. So thank you to the collectors who collect, and thank you to the institutions that preserve the legacies of these wonderful pieces. And I hope to see you on a future webinar. So thank you, everyone.